Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and today it's episode 134 in Season 2 of Pod Theory, all about debunking myths and misconceptions surrounding the world of podcasting. I have my main man, Travis Brown, with me as the Season 2 featured co-host. I hope you've been able to jump back in the season and listen to some of the previous conversations that Travis and I have had. I truly believe that this is a season that is jam-packed with value, and I hope that you're pulling something out of each episode that you listen to. Today, we're switching things up slightly as we go into list format. We've got 5 more myths and misconceptions around podcasting that we're going to share our thoughts on, and we're going to do so in a more abbreviated fashion, but we wanted to make sure that we got these out here before the season came to an end. So 134 is ready. It's waiting. In fact, you're already here. Welcome. Please take off your shoes and grab a cold beverage. It is time to dive in to episode 134 here on Season 2 of Pod Theory. Here we go. All right, we are back. Episode 134. What's up, Travis?
Hopefully people are like seeing that these myths are being crumbled, like we're taking a sledgehammer and just knocking them down. So
I have to think so.
Yeah, so they can create with a clearer head, because some of the things we're going to talk about today are really, when you say like a myth, it's really a misconception, is it not?
Yeah. Well, and that was why the whole theme of this season was debunking myths and misconceptions around podcasting, because I think going back and listening to these episodes, it's one of those virtual pep talks to some degree. I think people tend, and I mean, and you and I, we've talked about this on the side. We both fall victim to this every now and again. You get lost in Imposter Syndrome, which we'll talk about today. You get lost in a lot of different things that can throw you off your game. You maybe add too much to your plate and you're just lose focus of what's important. So if you feel that you're entering into that realm, there's 11 episodes of Pod Theory plus the first 125 in season 1 that you can fall back on and give yourself a little pep talk and talk yourself off the ledge. So
it's podcast pocket therapy. Just pull it out, plug it in.
There it is.
And feel better.
This is going to be there for the long haul. So today we're going to be talking about 5 more myths and misconceptions about podcasting. So the first 8 episodes of the season dove deep into many different subjects. We're going to condense a few more of those myths and misconceptions down today. We're going to bring it to you in list format, because everybody loves a good list, right?
Listicles.
You verbal trademarking that?
No, that's not mine.
That's not yours?
No.
I've never heard that. Let's start with number 1. My success in podcasting is predicated by how well this week's episode did. Why is that a myth, Travis?
Well, I mean, it's so funny because we're used to social media, our posts having a shelf life, right? Like you post it and there's pretty much like a window in which people interact with it. And yes, it's on the internet forever, but like you're either going to get some likes and hearts and all this stuff, or you're not, right? And then it kind of just like, you just forget about it. So I think we're preconditioned to think about podcasting in the same way, where we're like, oh yeah, like it's just this week I dropped this episode and that's what it's going to be. But the reality of the situation is that you're creating a content library and you have no idea when the next person's going to find you and listen to that episode. So if you get 50 downloads in week 1 and you're hanging your head like Charlie Brown, just remember you can't measure something that never stops growing. So you have to throw that concept out the window. Don't even look. Don't even look to see what your podcast did. It doesn't matter, because you have to look at all your numbers when you're officially retiring from podcasting and say, okay, that episode did 25,000 downloads, right? And that's your number. And then you turn off the RSS feed and you're done. But until then, it's really pointless, unless you're trying to sell advertisements, to worry about valuing your art with a download number this week.
I know we've talked about it throughout this season. Keep getting better at what you do. The numbers take care of themselves. If you keep putting out more valuable content, more people are going to catch on to that. They're going to tell others, and then they're going to tell others. And that's how you get this exponential growth surrounding your podcast. But if you put all your emphasis on the fact that, well, I've only got 5 people listening this week, or this episode was no good, I must not have a good podcast. You're going to get lost, and it's going to affect how you create that content. And then you do start looking at it on a week by week basis, and that's just going to completely throw you off your game.
Yeah, it's going to kill you. You're just going to always feel bad. And then if you're feeling bad, is what you're making really good? Because it comes through the microphone. If you're upset,
Yeah,
there's no way to mask that.
And it feels forced. It feels like it was whipped together on a whim. There's no real thought behind it. And you're doing yourself a disservice because you're wasting your time, and you're doing your audience a disservice because they're wasting their time listening to crap. And that's no way to grow. And then if you're fixated on a number, if you think about the logic there, it's pretty obvious why your audience isn't growing, because you're not giving them the value that's going to make them recommend your content to others. Number 2, the only way I can make my podcast grow is if I have a team to help me. Thoughts on this myth, Travis?
I think so. There's a lot of people out there that have a team helping them, and it's kind of like people who do CrossFit. How do you know someone does CrossFit? Well, they're going to tell you about it, right? So
that's a good point.
Building a team is definitely important at some level in the game. And I do believe that if there's something that you hate doing, you should definitely outsource it.
100%.
Yes.
I
don't like doing my taxes. I have an accountant. He does my taxes. I pay a premium, but I'm a happier person.
Right.
Success isn't predicated on your team. The team is built to help you be more efficient. But podcasting has been so overcomplicated. In reality, to have a podcast, you need to record audio and broadcast it over an RSS feed. You don't need a fancy intro. You don't need guests. You don't need social media clips. You don't need show notes. It's audio. So if you can muster up enough breath in your lungs to talk into a microphone long enough, record it, and post it on the internet, you're a podcaster. It's when we get into all these other things that we think we, quote, should be doing. You can't should all over yourself. If you can do those things, they're nice. But if it's causing you pain, at some point you need to consider a team. But when you have a team, you're going to be sharing the wealth. So you have to, it's a balance. It's a delicate balance of like, do I need this? Do I want this?
I think let's go back to episode 128, where we talked about the myth that people don't have enough time, or I don't have enough time to podcast. And some of the advice that we laid out when we were having that conversation was you have to set realistic expectations for yourself and manage your time so you can create and you can produce something valuable. And I think when someone thinks on this level of, well, I have to have a team so I can have someone edit my show, and then I can have someone do the show notes, and then I can have someone publish it, and then I have another person doing the social media and any of the outreach. That's great if you have the means to do that, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it all yourself, especially in the beginning when you haven't hit that big growth spurt yet. So keeping your expectations managed and allowing enough time in your schedule to put your podcast out there and do the necessary promotion for it and doing the guest outreach, this is all manageable. And there are many podcasters that do this on their own, and they're able to grow a show. Once they have that growth, then they can start to consider bringing more people on their team. And like you said, Travis, when you do that, you have to share the wealth. So if you're in a position to do that, that's fantastic. But it doesn't mean your show can't grow. It's all about how you manage those expectations and bring everything together so that if you get to a point where, let's say, show notes is your big bugaboo, you don't like writing your show notes. Okay, now it's going to make sense and free up more time for me to create and make good audio content, because now I've got someone that I hired to do my show notes, or I'm outsourcing that part of my podcast. And then if you put it together that way, you'll be able to grow, but you won't have to do it just because you have, or you're not growing just because you did that. You have all the other elements in place.
Yeah, I want to tag on 2 things to that. Is a
Please
new podcaster or an early podcaster or somebody who's getting into podcasting, the first 2 years of podcasting, you're developing skills. And if you outsource everything you do, you're not developing any skills.
Right on. Very good point.
You could stumble on, like, I love editing video, and that could be a new career path for you. But if you're not doing any of those things, you're not developing any skills. And then the other thing I just want to say to you is don't do it. If you don't like writing show notes, just don't do it. You can still put out a podcast without show notes. There's no rule that says you have to have show notes. Just don't do it. If you don't like promoting on social media, just don't do it. But if you want a podcast and that's what you enjoy, then do that. But again, well, I have to have show notes. I've got to have links. No, you don't. You do absolutely do not. So just don't do it.
That is great advice and a great challenge for you. If you are struggling with a certain aspect, try not doing it. Put a few shows out without show notes and not don't expect the world to change after one release, but you're going to feel a little better about it because you eliminated that big problem from your life. It's like breaking up with a troubled significant other. Once you cut that out of your life, it feels pretty good.
Yeah. Go look at my podcast. Go look at the last 5 episodes notes. It's like one sentence.
There you go. All right. Ready to move on to number 3?
Yes, sir.
Perfectionism.
You know what's boring?
What's boring?
Perfection.
Elaborate.
Let me paint a picture for you. I'm going to talk to you about the perfect room. It's got 4 walls. Everything's perfectly white. The floor is white. There's nothing in the room. There's no dust. There's no furniture. It's perfect. It's clean. It's perfect. It's boring. The cool things that happen in life, the cool things that happen in podcasting, the cool things that happen in art are happy accidents and interesting things. Like you never, does every actor on TV have a perfect Brad Pitt face? No. You got guys like Steve Buscemi out there with a broken piano in his mouth for teeth and big googly eyes and crazy hair, and he's interesting because he has an interesting look. Is he perfection? Is he the Fibonacci sequence of faces? No. I would argue that that Steve Buscemi is more interesting to me than whoever the heartthrob is, Tatum Channing or whoever the big buff, is that right? Is that a guy?
Channing Tatum.
Okay.
I think that's where you were going.
Okay, yes.
It's like you're just reading his name in the phone book. Please continue.
Yes. So the idea that something could be perfect means that you've sucked all the interesting characteristics out of it, in my opinion.
I agree with that to a degree. I think it's when we think of perfectionism, I'm looking at this 2 ways. We all have our own definition of it because, like to me, a perfect Sunday might be that I just get to sit on the couch and watch NFL Sunday Ticket all day. That's a perfect day for me. I'm just using this as an example. Obviously, this is not, well, don't get me wrong. I do like doing that, but that doesn't mean the day is perfect. But everyone else might say, oh, God, that sucks. I don't want to do that. Like for me, I look at if I'm going to do that, I'm working that into my week as my day to relax. And that's how I want to do it. That's perfection to me. Where I think we're going with podcasting is that everyone thinks that they have to have the perfect episode before it goes out. And when they don't release it, not realizing that they're never going to have a perfect episode. There's going to be flaws in one way, shape, or form. And even if in your own mind, what you put together is as close to perfection as you can get, it is guaranteed that when somebody listens to it, they're going to feel a different way because it's all subjective. So I think perfectionism as an entire philosophy and belief has to be debunked. We can't bring that into play when it comes to creating content, period, whether it's video, words, audio, you name it. You can't think on a perfectionist level and expect to get results because you're going to keep holding yourself back and setting up these arbitrary obstacles that you'll never be able to overcome.
Absolutely. It is a goal that you will never reach. And I again, lean into your imperfections. Like, I got pock marks all over my face and all kinds of things. And, I'll go get my picture taken and they Photoshop all of it off. I'm like, no. That's not who I am. Put it back. That scar over my eye, I earned it. Don't take that away from me.
Yeah, you hit it earlier. It's more interesting. There's got to be something that pulls you in, and if you're looking to get more listeners, if you're looking to grow, if you're looking to create something that people are truly going to connect with, it can't be this blasé, supposedly perfect thing, because there's just no level of interest there. There's got to be something that stands out, and that has nothing to do with perfection, because some people still will look at it and be like, oh, that's not interesting to me, but others will say, ooh, I want more of that. Let me check this out. So when you're creating, you've got to think on that level that what you're creating is not going to be perfect for 100% of the people all the time. But if you're looking at your ideal listener and that one person, that one avatar that you want to strike a chord with every piece of content that you're putting out there, don't think it's going to be perfect. Just focus on making it interesting and valuable to that one person.
Boom. Another myth that I think is very rampant in the industry is that, you got a social media account. You don't really need a website, do you?
This is so funny because me and my girlfriend did a podcast a few years ago, and it's no longer on the internet. And I think I mentioned this on a previous episode, how much I thought that show was going to take off, but because it didn't, we got discouraged. And this is when I was still very early in podcasting and not fully understanding what I was creating. The very first episode that we did was a back and forth. I was adamant that you didn't need a website because you had social media. And she was the counterpoint going, you're out of your freaking mind, dude. Like, no, you can't. That's not your, like, she had, looking back on it and remembering that conversation, I couldn't have been more wrong and she couldn't have been more right.
Yeah.
There are so many, and this is before algorithms really even changed. This wasn't really a topic of conversation with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram constantly changing things and making it more difficult to get presence. If you don't have something that's your own to direct people towards, you're really setting yourself up for failure. Now, you can have a website, and most host platforms will give you one, but there's still something valuable to having all of your podcasts on your website. You can go to jasoncercone.com right now, and you're going to find a separate post for each one of these episodes. And now every episode of season 2 of Pod Theory has a home. That's a little hub. So if Travis, you and I, let's say we want to revisit episode 130, and we want to talk about that a little bit more. We do it on YouTube. I can now take that video and embed it into that file or into that post on my website, reshare it. There's now more content there that whoever finds it can pull that value from the actual embedding of the podcast. They can pull from the show notes. They can pull from the video, anything that might get added to it as it goes. If you have a place that you can point people towards, you're going to have more of an opportunity to capture them, because while they're there, they might check out your email newsletter and subscribe. They might go back on another previous post that you put up. They may book a consultation or whatever your call to action is on your site. If you don't have that, you're going to miss out.
Yeah. Social media is not a website.
No, it's
and
not.
You do need to come up with ideas on how to drive people from your podcast to other places.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put all your eggs in the social media basket and they just say, Instagram's done, we're turning off the servers, and then that's where all your people are, how will people find you?
Absolutely. And speaking to that point, this is where the value of an email list comes into play. And if you're not building that list actively and trying to get more people into your own ecosystem, you're setting yourself up for that very thing to happen. And then you have no way to reconnect with those folks. But if you have them on your email list, it doesn't matter. Facebook and Instagram could shut down shop tomorrow and go move on, the owners can go live on some tropical islands somewhere, and we never hear from them again. Doesn't hurt your business one bit. But if you were solely relying on their platforms, what the hell are you going to do next? You're scrambling, and it's going to be extra hard to regain that presence.
Yep. I think we're going to dive a little deeper into that in episode 135.
I agree.
But the
preview.
next myth we should move to is your little friend on your shoulder, and his name is Imposter Syndrome. And
you're calling him a friend. That's a little generous. but I will say he is someone that is around a lot. He's more like the drunk uncle on the couch.
All right. Well, listen, he lives in my head rent free, so he's kind of
There
a
you go.
friend.
Okay.
Okay.
Now I am going to defer and pass the mic to you because, and this is again, I know we've plugged Travis's Instagram several times. You need to go check out the reel that Travis put together for the unexpected appearance of imposter syndrome and the impostercism that made him go away. You've coined
Absolutely.
yourself a nice phrase. This is something that really snaps it into perspective. You want to talk about finding some value in a 30-second reel? Fuck pointing at all the words that pop up on the screen. What you did in that 30 seconds, I think that spoke bigger volumes than any of that BS, because you showed that all you need to do is accept the fact that, yeah, this guy's going to pop up from time to time, but here's what you need to do to keep the focus where it needs to be. Just shut him down. Here's one way to do it. You did it in a very comedic way, but it told a good story. And I think a lot of people looking at that went, holy shit, this is hilarious. And it makes complete sense. So I want you to talk about imposter syndrome a little bit more, because clearly you've figured out the best way to shut it out.
So I think it's one of those things that never goes away. I think imposter syndrome is something that appears, and it's all about how you handle it. And imposter syndrome is simply your brain trying to protect you from things. Fight or flight. We are programmed to avoid danger, to avoid pain, to avoid embarrassment. And imposter syndrome is simply a guy or a gal who lives in our head who kind of taps on the window and says, hey, don't do that. No one's going to listen to you. No one wants to hear your stories. It'll be easier if you don't. You're going to fail. All those things that keep us from doing the thing we want to do, that we want to try. And so it shuts people down. Even big people, like I'm talking celebrities and the people you look up to, suffer from this. No one is free from imposter syndrome. But all it is yourself trying to make less pain for yourself. Okay. And the best things you can do in life are live through pain and to fail all the time. Because if you just succeed all the time, you're never going to learn anything. Nothing. You're going to learn nothing. It's like being a beautiful lady who just walks in everywhere, everything goes her way, and then she gets disfigured in a car accident and realizes how hard life really is. That's not how the world works. So you want to be failing, and I'm not saying all the time, but you want to be okay with trying something that doesn't work
and learning from those failures.
Correct. You can either do two things. You can either do something and try it and experiment, and then it goes wrong, and you can go, I knew it. I'm an idiot. I knew, you were right, imposter syndrome. I can't do this. Or you could go, what part of that didn't work? And to make a mental note of that and either optimize it or not do it again. So imposter syndrome is, I would be willing to say it's sort of a disease, and there's no medication for it except for the way you view it. So the next time imposter syndrome pops into your head, I just like to say, what is the worst thing that can happen? Imposter syndrome pop up and be like, well, you're not this or that. You're not a 7-figure guru. And I'd be like, yeah, but what's the worst that's going to happen if I try this? No one's going to die. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not going out of my way to tear someone down. Mm-hmm. Have I ever looked stupid before? Yeah, I'll look stupid again a few times, right? So just think of in another tool that I can just give to you to combat imposter syndrome is, you can put any number on this. You start with 5. So 5, 6, 7, 8. Will this matter to me in 8 days? Will this matter to me in 8 weeks? Will this matter to me in 8 years? And you start to put this little decision into perspective. And you're like, will I be worried about this in 8 years? No. Then of course you should try it, right? So just remember that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. Imposter syndrome is designed to protect you from falling off the cliff or getting eaten by the lion. And there's nothing you can do to undo that. It's programmed into you. but it's all about not letting imposter syndrome win.
It's brilliantly said. And I don't think we can really label imposter syndrome as a myth or a misconception because it's very real. And I think anybody listening to this podcast this very second has experienced it in some way, shape, or form in their journey. There's really not much more that I can add to it. Travis said it perfectly. You have to be willing to block that voice out and keep your focus on where it needs to be. And that's moving forward. And that's consistently producing value and making an impact on your community. When you do that and like I love that thought of rationalizing it to the point of, is this going to be something that I truly care about in a week, in a month, in a year? If you do start thinking about it on those terms, I'm going to implement that into all of my decision making strategies going forward, because that is a game changer in my opinion. If you start thinking more long term about the decisions versus what's going to happen in this small tiny little vacuum in the moment, you're going to probably be willing to take a lot more chances. So I challenge everybody listening to do that same exercise and start applying that level of thought to all of their decision making. Great stuff, man.
Thanks.
Well, let's get ready to wind down. We threw out our 5 myths and misconceptions, but let's add a couple bonuses in for everybody. So how about competition? Let's talk about competition. Is there a myth? Is there a misconception about competition in the podcasting space?
Yeah, I'm going to do this one quick because it's pretty.
Yeah, we're going rapid
dry
fire
here.
mode on these last 2.
The only person you're competing with is yourself. Are you a better version of what you've done yesterday? Are you a better version of what you've done the day before? At some point, the person you're looking at as your competition was in the exact same spot you were. And you know what they weren't doing? Was looking at other people, worrying about them. There's, I just went to the Arlington Park for the horse races, and they put these little blinders on the horses. And it's to keep them focused on just going straight and not worrying about the other horses, not worrying where everybody else is at. They put them on so they know you've got a clear path to go straight. So put your blinders on. Stop looking at people as competition, because there's 8 billion people on the planet. There's enough for everybody. And use your competition as inspiration. What do you like that they're doing? How can you apply that to yourself? What excites you about that person? How can you develop that excitement for your people? But if you're taking your eyes off of the wheel and looking at other people and what they're doing and feeling lack, you're already losing. Ask yourself this: are you better than you were yesterday? And that's the only competition you should be having.
I know I spoke about this on a past episode in season 1. The actual episode number is escaping me right now, but there's 125 of them, so I think I can get a pass. You're not, I mean, I think a lot of people look at the fact that there's, oh my gosh, and it's not just with podcasting, it's with everything. Oh my God, there's 330 million YouTube channels, and there's 660 million blogs and websites, and 2 million plus podcasts. Like, how am I ever going to compete in this space? First of all, stop looking at it like a competition. You're not jumping in this to compete. You're jumping in this to be collaborative, to be part of it, to add value to that overall ecosystem. When it comes to competition, you're not competing against 2 million podcasts. You're not even really competing against 1,000 podcasts. You're not even really competing against the podcasts that are in your space. So let's say you're one of 2 podcasts in your space. You're not competing against that other podcast, because they're probably not looking at you going, oh shit, I got to get them shut down. You said it perfectly, Travis. You're only competing against yourself. And if you keep the focus on yourself, more value is going to come, and better podcasts are going to come. Better content as a whole is going to come from you, because your focus is in the right place. Last one, pod fade. It's real. It's not spectacular, but it's something that a lot of podcasters have crop up in their world, and it really can throw them off their game. And I think we've done this to a large degree in several episodes this season. I know I've talked about it a lot back in season 1. Pod fade can be avoided if you're approaching your podcast with realistic expectations, you're managing your time, you have an actual plan, and you know what your podcast wants to accomplish, or what you want your podcast to accomplish, I should say. Travis, what do you feel people can do to keep podfade out of their world?
When things aren't adding up, start subtracting. That's my big advice. You've decided to podcast and you're like, I'm going to do a daily show. And then you got to promote it and record it and edit it and do all this, that, and the other thing. You're setting, you are in the driver's seat of the podcast. If you need a break, you take a break. You don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need to say you're sorry for it. You create when you can. If you look at your process and go, well, I'm spending an hour planning and 2 hours recording, and then I spend 2 hours making social media posts, and I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. What can you remove? What can you optimize? When things aren't adding up in any aspect of your life, start subtracting. And that is the best advice I could give to any podcaster. It's not complicated. You record audio and put it out. That is as easy as podcasting will ever be. Everything else that you've added into the process has been something somebody's told you that you need to do. And yes, it might be good advice, but maybe not right in this moment if it's going to stop you from pressing record. So that is the best way I could possibly put that in order to make an impact in your life today. The next time you think about quitting podcasting, what can you trim off? And what's left behind? All that should be left behind is that you're recording audio.
Very well said. And what a great way to wrap up episode 134 of Pod Theory. Now we're getting ready. We're winding down. We're getting the home stretch. We're going into episode 135. We're going to shift gears slightly. On episode 135, we're going to talk about the best way to grow your audience that most podcasters ignore. What do you think about that, Travis?
I think I'm ready to debunk another myth with you, Jason.
It's getting serious in here. Let's jump over to 135. We'll see you guys there. So there you have it. 5 more myths and misconceptions surrounding the podcasting space. Boom, debunked. This season is all about addressing some of the things that hold podcasters back, and I truly hope that you've been able to pull some value from these episodes and understand that putting a podcast out into the world is all about setting realistic expectations, having a plan and a goal in mind for what you want to accomplish and for what you want your show to be. Personally, I love the fact that a podcast has longevity, and this is something that can truly stand the test of time. So as you build your podcast, keep that front of mind. It's going to help you produce a much better show. So we're getting near the end. There are 2 episodes left here on season 2 of Pod Theory. And for the last 2, we're going to shift slightly away from the myths and misconceptions because we wanted to get into 2 very important topics. We're going to start with episode 135. And one of the biggest things that we are always concerned about as podcasters is growing our audience. So Travis and I are going to talk about the best way to grow your audience that most podcasters ignore. This is a very good topic, one that's very near and dear to me, and I'm looking forward to breaking this down. It's waiting for you on episode 135, and I'll be there waiting for you with open arms as well. And I'm sure Travis will too. Episode 135 lies ahead. This episode 134, is now over. It no longer is. It was. I am Jason Cercone, and I'll be waiting for you over on episode 135 until I see you there. End of podcast. The importance of your podcast guest presentation cannot be overlooked. If you aren't doing your research, discovering why the show is a good fit, and presenting yourself in a way that will make you stand out as a quality, knowledgeable guest, you're wasting your time and will never get the ROI the podcasting platform is capable of delivering. To help you create a thorough guest presentation that will increase your chances of getting booked for your dream interview, you need to pick up my free guide, How to Build a 5-Star Podcast Guest Presentation. Learn more at jasoncercone.com/5-star guide or click the link in the show notes to be connected to your free guide.